Karen wasn't just any HOA board member. Oh no. She thought she was the HOA's crown jewel, the enforcer, the neighborhood's self-declared empress. If the HOA had a throne, she'd be sitting on it, holding a scepter made out of violation notices and overdue fine slips. In her mind, the title board member came with powers only slightly less sweeping than the United Nations. And when you give someone like Karen even a tiny taste of perceived authority, they go from concerned neighbor to wannabe dictator faster than you can say, that grass is half an inch too tall. The delusion here is simple but dangerous. She thought the HOA's rules granted her personal authority over every square inch of the community, including the inside of my home. That's not how bylaws work. HOA rules exist to govern community property and create standards for shared spaces, not to let one self-important neighbor march through your front door like they're on a property inspection episode of Cops Suburban Edition. But to understand how Karen justified this to herself, you have to understand the psychological cocktail at play. It's equal parts boredom, power hunger, and suburban politics. See, HOAs often attract people who like control. Sometimes that's a good thing. You get organized folks who care about maintaining property values. Other times, though, you get Karens, people who confuse maintaining neighborhood aesthetics with micromanaging everyone else's lives. Karen wasn't just managing, she was auditioning for Queen of the Cul-de-sac. She'd show up at meetings like she was storming the Capitol, voice dripping with authority, quoting HOA bylaws she clearly didn't fully understand. And when that wasn't enough, she invented rules out of thin air. Like, oh, the HOA has the right to enter homes for inspections. Wrong. Unless you live in some kind of dystopian Stepford community with invasive covenants, no HOA can just waltz into your house. At most, they can request exterior compliance, and even that usually requires notice. But delusion is a powerful thing. To Karen, her position on the board gave her the right to treat the neighborhood as her personal surveillance state. She'd lurk around houses, peeking over fences, inspecting mailboxes, and, in my case, crossing the final line by stepping inside without permission. She probably thought she was checking on something, but let's call it what it was: trespassing dressed up as community service. Now here's where it gets funny, because delusional authority types always think they're untouchable. They tell themselves, I'm not breaking the law, I'm enforcing the rules. It's like watching someone run a red light and argue with the cop that they were just testing the system. Karen thought HOA bylaws trumped state trespassing laws. Newsflash, they don't. No HOA clause in the world overrides criminal statutes. And last time I checked, HOA Karen privilege isn't recognized in any legal jurisdiction. But here's the kicker. Karen's delusion wasn't just about her. She thought the entire board would back her. In her head, she was a soldier of the HOA, carrying out a mission on behalf of the community. That gave her even more bravado, because if she got caught, she assumed the HOA shield would protect her. I was acting as a board member, she'd say, as though those words were a get-out-of-jail-free card. Wrong again. When board members act outside their official duties, the HOA can actually be more liable, because now the whole organization might be on the hook for enabling rogue behavior. Karen didn't just cross a personal line, she potentially put the entire HOA in legal jeopardy. Imagine explaining to your insurance company that one of your board members thought it was totally okay to stroll into someone's living room without permission. Yeah, good with that claim. So fact number one is this: HOA Karens often live in a bubble of false authority. They think being on a board makes them royalty, when in reality, it makes them volunteers with limited powers bound by bylaws and state law. But when that bubble pops, when real-world rules collide with HOA fantasy land, the results can be catastrophic. For Karen, it meant waking up from her delusion to the sound of a canine barking like the voice of suburban justice. And that's where things start to spiral. Because once the delusion of authority cracks, you see the next layer, the actual trespassing itself.
So if fact number 1 was about her living in a fantasy kingdom, fact number 2 is where reality smacks her in the face. Because this wasn't enforcement, this was breaking and entering. And trust me, that's when the gloves come off.
Here's the thing about HOAs. They love the word enforcement. It sounds so official, doesn't it? Like the board members are deputized marshals in some suburban Wild West. In reality, enforcement usually means sending passive-aggressive letters about your trash cans, or slapping you with a fine because your garden gnome is apparently lowering property values. But Karen? She redefined enforcement in her own twisted little dictionary. To her, enforcement meant walking through my front door, uninvited, as if my home were just an extension of the community clubhouse. She probably pictured herself as the neighborhood's law enforcer, strutting in with a clipboard in one hand and a smug smile in the other. But the truth? She wasn't enforcing anything. She was trespassing. Straight up, cut and dry, textbook definition, entering property without permission. The legal difference is massive. Enforcement, in the HOA sense, has rules and procedures. HOAs can issue notices, levy fines, and in some cases place liens. It's bureaucratic and boring. A paper war, not a home invasion. Trespassing, on the other hand, is criminal. You cross the threshold of someone's private residence without permission, and boom, you're not a board member anymore. You're a suspect. Think of it like this. Enforcement is sending an email. Trespassing is breaking into someone's inbox. One is annoying, the other is a felony. And yet, Karen blurred the line so badly you'd think she needed new glasses. She honestly thought she had a right to enter. Maybe she told herself she was checking for compliance. Maybe she thought my porch light bulb wasn't regulation wattage. Or maybe, and this is my favorite theory, she just wanted to snoop. Let's be honest, most Karens don't enforce, they snoop. They crave control, and snooping is control's messy cousin. Now, here's where it gets deliciously ironic. HOA bylaws almost always stress boundaries. In fact, many states require HOAs to respect private property. Boards are there to manage shared spaces, pools, parks, sidewalks, not your living room. But Karen must have skipped that chapter. Or maybe she skimmed it and thought respect private property was more of a suggestion, like eat your vegetables. Legally speaking, there is no gray area here. If you cross into someone's home without explicit consent, you're trespassing. Period. Courts don't care if you're wearing a name badge that says HOA Vice President. They don't care if you're carrying a binder full of bylaws. They don't care if you shout, "I'm enforcing the rules." The law doesn't hand out free monopoly passes for self-righteous board members. If you're in my house without permission, you're breaking the law. End of story. But here's the kicker. Trespass isn't just a minor slip-up. Depending on the state, it can escalate fast. Trespass can become criminal trespass, and criminal trespass can become breaking and entering. Add intent, like snooping, stealing, or even just moving things around, and suddenly we're talking burglary charges. That's not slap on the wrist territory. That's mugshot on the evening news territory. And imagine the HOA fallout. Because when one board member trespasses, the whole association feels the heat. Neighbors lose trust, lawsuits loom, insurance premiums spike. Suddenly the HOA isn't the enforcer anymore, it's the defendant. And the more Karen screamed, "I was just enforcing the rules," the more the HOA looked like an organization out of control. That's how one Karen's personal crusade becomes everyone's collective nightmare. But let's zoom back in on the scene, because this isn't just about dry legalities. It's about audacity. Karen didn't just cross my threshold physically, she crossed it mentally. She believed her HOA title was a shield protecting her from accountability. She probably expected me to thank you for checking in. Can you imagine? "Oh, hey, Karen, thanks for rifling through my living room. Next time, help yourself to the fridge." Yeah, no. Here's where the comedy kicks in. Trespassers expect silence. They expect to sneak in, do their thing, and slip out unnoticed. But Karen didn't account for my very loud, very loyal canine. The second she stepped inside, she triggered the canine alarm system. No batteries required. And let me tell you, a bark echoing through your skull does wonders for cutting through delusion. So, here's the takeaway for fact number 2. Don't confuse enforcement with trespassing. Enforcement is paperwork. Trespassing is handcuffs. HOAs can regulate shared spaces, not your personal sanctuary. The moment Karen blurred that line, she wasn't a board member anymore. She was just another trespasser caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. And in her case, the wrong time included a German Shepherd who didn't need bylaws to enforce boundaries. So if fact number 2 showed us the line between enforcement and trespassing, fact number 3 is where the fur really flies, literally. Because my canine didn't just guard the house, he delivered the kind of reality check no HOA manual could prepare Karen for.
You know what's better than a no trespassing sign? A 90-pound German Shepherd with a bark that sounds like the gates of Hades opening. Signs are suggestions, locks are challenges. But a canine? That's a full-on announcement. Step any closer and you'll regret it. Karen, of course, didn't get the memo. She thought my dog was just for show, like a decorative lawn gnome that occasionally wags its tail. In her mind, my canine was a background character, a prop in her HOA soap opera. Wrong. This dog was the star of the episode, and let me tell you, his performance deserves an Emmy. Here's the beauty of a canine deterrent. It flips the script instantly. Burglars, trespassers, and yes, rogue HOA Karens rely on the element of surprise. They think they can slip in unnoticed, snoop around, and slip back out before anyone catches them. But when there's a dog on the premises, surprise is no longer their weapon. Fear is. The second Karen cracked that door, she got hit with a sound wave of pure canine authority. That bark wasn't just loud, it was primal. It tapped into the part of your brain that says, "You are not welcome here. Turn back or prepare for dental consequences." And let's not downplay the psychology here. A dog changes everything. Without one, Karen might have taken her time. She could have snooped through mail, picked at my decor, maybe even snapped a few photos for her next HOA meeting. But with a canine blasting decibels at her? Forget it. Every second inside feels like a countdown to chaos. She went from self-righteous board member to panicked intruder faster than you can say, sit. Now, Karen didn't get bitten. Let's make that clear. My dog is trained, disciplined, and smart enough to know the difference between warning and attack. But here's the kicker. The bark alone was enough to make her life flash before her eyes. Imagine breaking into a house and suddenly being faced with a set of teeth that looked like they were designed by a horror movie prop department. You don't stick around to negotiate bylaws. You look for the nearest exit. Dignity be damned. This is why homeowners invest in canines. They're not just pets, they're security systems with fur. You don't need your dog to actually attack. In most cases, the bark alone does the job. It's the sound of ownership, of territory, of primal don't even think about it. Criminals don't argue with dogs. They don't send cease and desist letters. They hear the bark, they leave. End of story. And yet, Karen tried to out-Karen the dog. Can you picture it? She actually raised her voice like she could verbally dominate a German Shepherd. "Quiet down," she probably shrieked, as if my dog was going to say, "Oh, my apologies, Madam HOA. Please continue violating the law." The sheer audacity is almost impressive. Almost. But here's the thing about dogs. They don't care about titles. HOA board member, neighborhood president, Queen of England. None of that matters. To a dog, you're either family or you're a stranger. Karen was the latter. And strangers don't get privileges. This moment was the turning point. Up until then, Karen could cling to her delusion of enforcement. She could tell herself she was just doing her duty. But the second the canine barked, that narrative crumbled. Because no amount of HOA authority could explain away why she was in someone else's house with a dog snarling at her. It wasn't enforcement anymore. It was survival. And here's where the comedy really lands. Karen probably thought I was the problem in the neighborhood. She probably wrote emails about my lawn, complained about my fence, whispered about my unapproved decorations. Yet there she was, cornered by a dog because she couldn't respect the most basic rule of all. Don't enter a house that isn't yours. The irony writes itself. So fact number 3 is this: never underestimate the power of a canine. They're more than punchlines, more than deterrents. They're protectors. And in this case, my dog didn't just protect the house. He exposed Karen's hypocrisy in the loudest way possible. She wanted authority, but authority doesn't bark. Boundaries do. And speaking of boundaries, once Karen realized she wasn't in charge of this situation, she panicked. And when people panic, they make mistakes, the kind that turn a trespass into a full-blown legal disaster. That's where fact number 4 comes in.
Here's the thing about breaking into someone's house. It's not a gray area. It's not like rolling through a stop sign at 3 a.m. or borrowing a neighbor's Wi-Fi password. No, this is felony territory. You cross that threshold uninvited, and congratulations, you've just signed yourself up for a front row seat in Courtroom Drama 101. Karen, of course, strutted into my home like it was a PTA bake sale. She wasn't thinking felony. She was thinking, I'm the law. Spoiler alert, she wasn't. The law has no patience for HOA hallucinations. The second she opened that door, she wasn't the enforcer, she was the intruder. And legally, that changes everything. Let's break it down. First off, trespassing. That's the appetizer. But we're not talking about wandering onto someone's lawn to cut across the block. Nope, this was full-on breaking and entering. Karen didn't just stroll by. She let herself in. And when you combine B&E with intent, which in her case was snooping, photographing, or who knows what, you're cooking up a felony casserole. And here's the kicker. Homeowners have rights. Big rights. In most states, your home is your castle. Legally speaking, that means you don't just get to protect it, you're expected to. If someone breaks in, the law doesn't ask you to brew them a cup of tea and talk about your differences. It recognizes your safety is paramount. So imagine how the cops felt when they rolled up to this scene. Karen, HOA clipboard in hand, cornered by a German shepherd, babbling about bylaws. I guarantee you the officer's internal monologue was something like, "Ma'am, you realize you're cooked, right?" But it doesn't stop there. Here's a delicious little legal twist: liability. Because when you break into a home, you assume all the risks. That means if Karen had tripped on the welcome mat, sprained her ankle, or heaven forbid got nipped by my canine, she couldn't sue me. She wasn't invited. She wasn't supposed to be there. The law doesn't reward burglars with settlements. Her legal standing went poof the second she crossed that threshold. And the paperwork, arrest records, charges, maybe even mugshots. Imagine sitting at the next HOA board meeting knowing everyone has seen your booking photo. It's hard to lecture people about mailbox paint colors when your own crime of the week is still trending on the neighborhood group chat. And here's where it gets juicier. Karen's actions didn't just hurt her legally, they damaged the entire HOA's reputation. Because now instead of being seen as an organization that maintains community standards, the HOA looks like a clown car of overreach. One board member goes rogue, and suddenly the whole group is under suspicion. Neighbors start asking, if she broke into his house, what's stopping her from trying mine? Trust? Gone. Respect? Vaporized. Authority? Shattered like cheap glass. And let's not forget the criminal charges themselves. Prosecutors love cases like this because they're clean-cut. No messy he said, she said. No complicated forensics. Just a Karen caught red-handed in a stranger's home with zero legal justification. Slam dunk! If you were in the jury box, would you side with the dog owner defending his castle or the trespasser who thought her HOA title was a golden ticket? Exactly. The irony here is delicious. Karen probably imagined herself as a guardian of the community. She probably believed she was doing her duty. Instead, she gift-wrapped herself for the justice system. And the cherry on top, thanks to my canine's presence, there's no question of intent. This wasn't a friendly neighborly check-in. You don't scream at someone's German shepherd and call it community outreach. This was trespass, intimidation, and harassment all rolled into one. And the best part? The law doesn't care if you call yourself president of the HOA or supreme overlord of mailbox heights.
Titles don't matter when you're standing in someone else's living room without permission. You're not a leader, you're a criminal. So fact number 4 is this: HOA authority stops at the curb. Once you break into a private home, you're not an enforcer, you're an offender. And the law, it's not on your side. It's waiting with open arms to remind you of the one rule even Karen couldn't twist. A person's home is sacred. But here's the wild part. While the legal system was preparing to feast on Karen's misstep, the neighborhood itself was already buzzing. And what happens when gossip collides with HOA drama? Buckle up, because fact 5 is pure fireworks.
If you think the legal system hit Karen hard, just wait until you hear what the neighbors did. Because let's be honest, in any suburban battleground, gossip moves faster than Wi-Fi. And in an HOA, gossip isn't just entertainment, it's currency. The moment word got out that Karen had broken into my house and been greeted by my very enthusiastic canine, the neighborhood turned into a live-action soap opera. Picture it: lawn chairs being dragged onto porches, whispers echoing louder than lawnmowers, and entire families taking a walk at the exact same time just to pass by and catch a glimpse of the crime scene. This wasn't news, this was primetime television, and every single neighbor had front row seats. Now here's the ticker. HOAs thrive on appearances. They want everything to look perfect: manicured lawns, matching mailboxes, fresh coats of beige paint. But once the story spread, the HOA's pristine facade cracked like a cheap sidewalk. Suddenly, Karen wasn't the president of order, she was the neighborhood punchline. People started calling her breaking and entering Barbie, clipboard crook, even Karen the burglar queen. Suburban creativity knows no limits. And let's not underestimate how quickly alliances shifted. Some neighbors who once worshipped Karen's strict enforcement of the bylaws suddenly went radio silent. Why? Because nobody wants to be seen defending the lady who got chased out of a house by a German shepherd. It's one thing to enforce lawn height. It's another to become a meme in your own cul-de-sac. Oh, and the memes. They spread faster than fertilizer in spring. Someone photoshopped Karen's face onto a "Beware of Dog" sign. Another neighbor slapped her head onto a cartoon burglar carrying a sack with the $sign. Before long, Karen wasn't feared, she was laughed at. And in HOA politics, that's the ultimate defeat. But here's where it gets fascinating. The neighborhood's view of the HOA itself changed overnight. People started questioning, if Karen felt entitled to break into one house, how many other authority stunts had gone unchecked? That holiday lights fine from last year suddenly seemed less about rules and more about power. That letter about patio furniture, now it looked like harassment. Karen's break-in didn't just ruin her reputation, it exposed the HOA's fragile house of cards. Some neighbors rallied. They began whisper campaigns, calling for new elections, demanding transparency, even suggesting dismantling the HOA altogether. Others, of course, stayed neutral, clutching their HOA-approved garden gnomes and muttering, well, rules are rules. But here's the thing. Neutrality is hard to maintain when Karen's mugshot is circulating in the neighborhood group chat with a caption that reads, "This week's HOA newsletter cover girl." And let's not underestimate how sheer entertainment value. For years, Karen had been the self-appointed sheriff for the subdivision, handing out fines like they were candy. But now, the sheriff was the outlaw, and you better believe people reveled in that role reversal. The same neighbor she fined for a slightly crooked mailbox, he suddenly had the confidence of a man who just hit the Powerball. The family she harassed for leaving Christmas lights up a week too long, they were practically hosting viewing parties to rehash the drama. But here's the deeper truth buried beneath the laughs. Karen's stunt fractured the neighborhood's trust. HOAs are built on the illusion that board members act in the best interest of the community. When one of them breaks that trust by, illegally breaking into a house, it forces everyone to ask, who's next? And once neighbors start asking that question, the HOA's power crumbles. And you want to know the cherry on top? My K9 became a local hero. Kids started asking his name on their way to school. Parents told their toddlers, see, that's the dog who protected Mr. Smith's house. One neighbor even baked dog biscuits and left them in my mailbox with a note that said, for the real HOA president. If Karen wanted authority, she lost it to a four-legged furball with better approval ratings than any board member could dream of. So fact 5 is this. Neighborhood fallout isn't just embarrassment, it's a demolition of power. Karen went from feared enforcer to community clown. And in the world of HOAs, reputation is everything. She lost her neighbors, her credibility, and her control, all thanks to one very bad decision and one very good boy. But the story doesn't end there with laughter and memes, because when an HOA implodes from the inside, it leaves one big messy question. What happens to the entire organization when its leader becomes its liability? That's where Fact 6 takes us.
Ah, the HOA board, the suburban equivalent of a medieval court, complete with power struggles, gossip, and at least one self-crowned monarch. And when Karen, the reigning queen of nitpicking, face-planted into a legal disaster, the board went into full-blown meltdown. Let's set the scene. HOA board meetings are usually boring. They're about trash collection schedules, paint swatches, and how many inches above the curb your shrubs are allowed to grow. But after Karen's break-in fiasco, those meetings suddenly turned into cage matches. Picture folding chairs squeaking, veins popping, and passive-aggressive comments flying faster than free samples at Costco. Because here's the thing. HOAs thrive on image. They need to look united, polished, in control. But the second their star enforcer, the person they'd relied on to bully neighbors into compliance, got busted by a German shepherd and the law, cracks started showing. Some board members immediately distanced themselves. "We never authorized this," they whispered, hands trembling as they shuffled their papers. Others doubled down, claiming Karen's intentions were pure. Spoiler, the law doesn't grade intentions. And oh, the blame game. You've never seen finger-pointing like an HOA board in crisis. One camp wanted Karen gone immediately, stripped of her title, erased from the minutes like a typo. Another camp wanted to circle the wagons, protect her, and spin the story into some kind of misunderstanding. That spin, by the way, crashed harder than a Windows 95 computer. Nobody was buying it. The best part? The board wasn't just fighting each other. They were panicking about lawsuits. Because when one of your leaders breaks into a home, suddenly the entire HOA could be seen as complicit. Did they know? Did they encourage it? Is this what my dues are paying for? Neighbors weren't asking politely, they were demanding answers. And nothing sends an HOA board into chaos faster than realizing their precious monthly fees might get rerouted into a courtroom. Here's where it got Shakespearean. Backstabbing. Members who had once cheered Karen's reign were now lining up to throw her under the metaphorical bus. "Well, she did always take things too far," one board member murmured, suddenly forgetting all the times they backed her fines and rulings. It was less about loyalty, more about survival. Because when the HOA ship starts sinking, everyone grabs for the lifeboats, even if it means shoving Karen overboard. And let's not ignore the hypocrisy. The same people who preached community unity were now unleashing verbal knives at each other behind closed doors. It wasn't a board anymore, it was a battlefield. Meetings stretched on for hours, filled with motion after motion, amendment after amendment, all trying to figure out how to patch the gaping hole Karen had blasted into their reputation. Spoiler, duct tape doesn't fix a sinking ship. Meanwhile, outside the boardroom, neighbors were watching the implosion with popcorn in hand. Word of the screaming matches leaked. Someone even live texted updates from inside a meeting. Karen just got compared to a cat burglar. Steve called Janice an enabler. Oh wow, now they're arguing about whether the bylaws cover German Shepherd-related incidents. The HOA's dirty laundry wasn't just being aired, it was being broadcast in 4K. And the fallout didn't stop with gossip. Some homeowners started withholding dues in protest. "Why should I pay for an HOA that can't even control its own board?" others muttered. Legal threats started flying, petitions for dissolution circulated, and suddenly the almighty HOA wasn't looking so mighty anymore. It was looking like a collapsing Jenga tower. The irony is thick here. HOAs are supposed to maintain order, to keep neighborhoods tidy, safe, and harmonious. But Karen's power trip turned them into the opposite: disorganized, unsafe, and chaotic. The board, once feared, became a running joke. They couldn't even control one of their own members, so how could they possibly control an entire neighborhood? So fact number 6 is this: Karen didn't just sabotage herself, she detonated her own HOA from the inside. And once the board lost the narrative, it wasn't just an internal meltdown, it was a public unraveling. The HOA, the very institution meant to uphold order, became the neighborhood's biggest circus act. Transition hook. But if you think the HOA's implosion was the end of the drama, think again. Because when the news media caught wind of this suburban soap opera, Karen's humiliation went from neighborhood chatter to national headline. And that brings us to fact number 7.
If Karen thought the barking dog and neighborhood memes were the peak of her humiliation, she severely underestimated the internet's appetite for HOA drama. Because the second the local news sniffed out this story, it went from suburban scandal to headline gold. And let's be real, nothing travels faster online than a tale of a Karen caught red-handed. Picture this: the evening news anchor, sitting there in a blazer 3 sizes too big, trying not to smirk as they read, "A local HOA president is facing charges after allegedly breaking into a neighbor's home, only to be confronted by the homeowner's canine." The footage rolls, flashing police lights, neighbors whispering on camera, and one glorious close-up shot of my German Shepherd wagging his tail like he just got promoted to chief of security. Boom! Instant ratings. And the media didn't just report it, they devoured it. Talk shows picked it up, radio hosts roasted it, bloggers slapped on titles like Karen versus K9, Suburbia Showdown, and racked up clicks like slot machines hitting jackpot. Even meme accounts got in on the fun, posting clips of guard dogs with captions like, "HOA dues collected here." Suddenly, Karen wasn't just infamous on my block, she was infamous everywhere. The internet has this way of turning everything into a spectacle, and this was the perfect storm. You had the villain, Karen, the hero, the dog, the setting, suburban HOA land where drama hides behind every white picket fence, and the plot twist, Karen caught in the act. It was practically scripted for virality. The hashtags alone could have powered a week's worth of trending. Hashtag Karen versus K9, hashtag HOA home invasion, hashtag bark justice. But here's the part Karen never saw coming. When the media spotlight hits, it magnifies everything. Suddenly, reporters were digging into HOA complaints, interviewing disgruntled neighbors, even poking through public records for past controversies. What started as Karen broke into a house ballooned into the HOA's a hot mess, and here's a 10-minute expose about it. Karen didn't just drag herself into the spotlight, she dragged the entire HOA brand down with her. And the public? Oh, they feasted. Comment sections were a battlefield of snark. "Guess she thought the bylaws applied to breaking and entering too," one commenter wrote. Another added, "Finally a German Shepherd enforcing the rules I actually support." Some people joked about hiring my K9 as their own HOA president. Others started crowdfunding ideas like "Buy the Dog a Mayoral" campaign. Honestly, he'd probably win. Here's the beauty. Once the internet gets a hold of you, control is gone. Karen couldn't spin this as a misunderstanding anymore. She couldn't call it routine inspection. She was cemented in the digital archives as the HOA Karen who lost the battle to a barking dog. And unlike gossip at the block barbecue, the internet doesn't forget. 10 years from now, someone will still be typing her name into Google and chuckling at the mugshot next to the word trespass. But let's dig deeper. The media attention didn't just humiliate Karen. It shifted the power dynamic of the entire neighborhood. Suddenly, I wasn't the villain for not following HOA rules. I was the guy who exposed the HOA's overreach. Neighbors who were once silent supporters of Karen now had a rallying cry. If the news is covering this, then maybe the HOA isn't protecting us, maybe it's threatening us. That's the double-edged sword of virality. The story started with one Karen's ego, but the ripple effect shook the whole system. Journalists love to find a bigger angle, and here it was. Are HOAs abusing power? Overnight, my dog didn't just become a local hero, he became a national symbol of don't mess with homeowners. And the irony? Karen wanted power, control, and respect. Instead, she got notoriety. And not the kind you can spin into a resume booster. When your name trends alongside trespassing and German Shepherd attack warning, you're not a leader, you're a cautionary tale. So fact number 7 is this. Once the media catches your HOA scandal, the game changes forever. You're no longer fighting neighbors in cul-de-sac debates. You're battling memes, headlines, and hashtags. And in that arena, Karen never stood a chance. Transition hook. But as the cameras packed up and the hashtags cooled, one very real question lingered. What about Karen herself? How do you bounce back after being publicly roasted by an entire town, a German Shepherd, and the internet? That brings us to fact number 8.
Here's the thing about a suburban Karen. Her power doesn't come from a badge, a paycheck, or even the HOA bylaws she clutches like holy scripture. Nope, her power comes from reputation, from people believing she's in charge, fearing her fines, and respecting her clipboard like it's the neighborhood constitution. But once that reputation cracks, oh, it doesn't just break, it shatters into confetti. And in Karen's case, the confetti was scattered across cul-de-sacs, Facebook feeds, and the 6 o'clock news. Let's be blunt. After the break-in fiasco, Karen's name became suburban poison. You couldn't even whisper it at the grocery store without someone raising an eyebrow. The woman who once strutted down the block like a self-appointed sheriff was suddenly ducking behind shelves in the cereal aisle, praying no one asked, "Hey Karen, how's the burglary business treating you?" Socially, she was radioactive. Her old circle of HOA cronies, gone. The neighborhood power moms who once applauded her enforcement of lawn height rules now ghosted her group texts. The guys she rallied to complain about unsightly basketball hoops, they were too busy laughing at memes of her running from my German Shepherd. And the ultimate betrayal? Even the neighbor who once swore she was just doing her duty avoided eye contact at the mailbox. See, reputation is like credit. It takes years to build and seconds to destroy. Karen had built hers on intimidation, nitpicking, and fines. But the second she got caught trespassing in broad daylight, her credibility went bankrupt. You can't enforce rules when people don't take you seriously. And in Karen's case, people weren't just dismissing her, they were mocking her. And oh, the jokes. Every cookout, every block party, every casual, hey, wave across the street moment turned into an opportunity to roast Karen. Someone would innocently ask, "Hey, do you lock your doors at night?" And another neighbor would chime in, "Better hope Karen doesn't have a spare key." Kids drew chalk art on sidewalks with stick figure Karens being chased by giant dogs. One family even dressed their German Shepherd in a little HOA security vest for Halloween. The punchline never died. But the fallout wasn't just social humiliation, it was deeply personal. Imagine dedicating years of your life to being the HOA enforcer, the guardian of community standards, only to have that title ripped away and replaced with the criminal who thought bylaws outranked burglary laws. Karen didn't just lose her position, she lost her identity, her influence, and her standing in the community she once controlled. From queen bee to social leper, her downfall wasn't just poetic, it was permanent.
So here's the million-dollar question. After Karen's spectacular meltdown, the break-in, the dog, the memes, the mugshot, what happens to the neighborhood itself? Because an HOA isn't just one person. It's supposed to be an entire system, a structure, the glue holding the community together. But when the self-proclaimed queen bee faceplants, that glue doesn't just weaken, it dissolves. And let me tell you, my neighborhood was never the same again. First, let's talk about the vibe. Before Karen's downfall, stepping outside felt like living in a high school run by hall monitors. Everyone worried about being caught,
A trash can left out too long, a lawn too tall, a car parked slightly crooked. Karen's clipboard had the power to ruin your week. But after her little trespassing episode, poof, that fear evaporated. People started leaving their trash bins out overnight, just to test the waters. Kids left their basketball hoops up all week. Holiday lights? Oh, those stayed up until Easter. And the funny part? Nobody cared anymore. It was like the entire neighborhood collectively exhaled for the first time in years. And that shift from fear to freedom was contagious. Once neighbors realized Karen wasn't coming back with her measuring tape of doom, they started pushing boundaries further. One guy built a fire pit in his yard without approval. Another painted his shutters bright blue, a color that would have sent Karen into cardiac arrest. The neighborhood started looking less like a Stepford suburb and more like a place where, actual humans live. And shocker, the sky didn't fall. Of course, the HOA board scrambled to maintain control. They tried sending out strongly worded letters, hosting emergency meetings, and insisting the rules still mattered. But the thing about authority is once people stop respecting it, the rules are just ink on paper. Without Karen to enforce them, and without the fear she created, the HOA's power was basically a scarecrow in a cornfield. It looked intimidating from a distance, but up close, nothing but straw. Now, let's talk about the neighbors themselves. Before, people kept to themselves, avoiding conflict. But Karen's disaster became a bonding moment. Suddenly, everyone had a shared enemy, and nothing unites a community faster than a collective eye roll. Block parties popped up, neighbors swapped stories about their worst HOA run-ins. One guy even brought a slideshow to a barbecue titled "Finds I Survived, a Tribute to Karen." Laughter replaced fear, and for the first time, the HOA wasn't the center of the neighborhood's identity, the people were. And oh, the elections. After the fallout, new board members were needed. Candidates stepped forward with promises like "no more tyranny" and "let's keep the HOA about lawns, not lawsuits." Campaign signs sprouted faster than dandelions. It was less about who could enforce rules and more about who could not turn into the next Karen. Ironically, people who had never cared about HOA politics suddenly became passionate about dismantling its worst habits. The HOA itself had two options: reform or crumble. Some folks wanted it dissolved entirely. "We don't need babysitters for our mailboxes," they argued. Others wanted to keep it, but scale it back to the basics: roads, lights, common spaces. Either way, the old HOA culture of micromanagement was dead. And honestly, good riddance. Here's the kicker. The neighborhood actually became better after the collapse. Without Karen's constant surveillance, people felt more ownership of their homes, not less. Families invested in their yards because they wanted to, not because a letter threatened them. Community spirit thrived because it was voluntary, not forced. Imagine that, people being neighborly without the looming threat of a $50 fine for having the wrong shade of mulch. So fact number 9 is this. Karen's implosion didn't just change her life, it rewired the entire neighborhood. Fear gave way to freedom. Authority gave way to community. And in the end, the HOA learned a brutal truth. Rules without respect are meaningless. The future wasn't about fines or power, it was about people reclaiming their neighborhood, one lawn, one barbecue, one laugh at Karen's expense at a time.
So here we are, the end of the road. Or should I say, the end of Karen's reign. And if you've been following along, you already know this story is bigger than one woman, one dog, or one HOA. It's the perfect cocktail of power gone unchecked, entitlement meeting reality, and the universe serving a steaming hot plate of karma with a side of bite marks. But the real question is, what's the takeaway? Because every wild HOA saga, from mailbox drama to paint color wars, leaves behind a lesson. And this one? Oh, it's a doozy. Let's start with the obvious. Power without boundaries is dangerous. Karen wasn't just a nosy neighbor. She was a person who let the tiniest sliver of authority warp into full-blown delusion. Give someone a clipboard, and suddenly they think they're running the Pentagon. She convinced herself she had the right to police homes like a sheriff in a Western movie. And because nobody pushed back early enough, that delusion grew into the ultimate HOA nightmare, a literal home invasion. But here's the kicker. Her downfall proves that unchecked authority eventually eats itself alive. Karen pushed too far, crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and in doing so, she torched her own credibility. And you know what? That's a universal law, not just an HOA one. Bullies collapse under their own weight when their victims stop buying the act. Now let's talk about the unsung hero of this saga, the K9. That dog wasn't just a pet, it was the ultimate reality check. Because while Karen thought she could override property rights, the dog didn't care about board meetings, bylaws, or fines. The dog dealt in primal truth. You don't belong here. And that's the beauty of it. Sometimes it doesn't take a lawsuit or a protest to end tyranny. Sometimes it just takes a bark with teeth behind it. But beyond the bite marks and the broken pride, this whole ordeal spotlights something we all need to remember. Your home is sacred. It's your space, your castle, your retreat from the chaos of the world. Nobody, not an HOA, not a neighbor, not even a so-called Karen on patrol, has the right to breach that. The moment they do, it's not about rules anymore. It's about safety, dignity, and freedom. And that's why fact number 10 matters most. This wasn't just Karen's personal embarrassment. It was a wake-up call about what happens when homeowners forget they have power too. HOAs only work when people hand them respect and authority. Take that back, and suddenly the whole facade collapses, just like it did here. Think about it. Karen's meltdown reshaped an entire neighborhood. Fear dissolved. People started laughing again. The board had to actually answer to the community. That doesn't happen often. Usually, these stories end with homeowners beaten down by fines and threats. But this one ended with a bark, a lesson, and a neighborhood that realized it didn't need a dictator to function. So if you remember nothing else, remember this. Power is only as strong as the respect it commands. Karen lost both, and the whole system went with her. The dog might have stolen the spotlight, but the bigger bite was delivered to the illusion of HOA supremacy. And honestly, that's a win worth celebrating. Because at the end of the day, this isn't just an HOA war story. It's a human story. A story about boundaries, freedom, and the hilarious downfall of someone who thought they were untouchable until a four-legged enforcer reminded her that, no, actually, she wasn't. So here's to the neighborhood that survived. Here's to the dog that defended its turf. And here's to every homeowner out there who knows the truth. Your home is yours, no matter what the clipboard crowd says.